I want to talk about the IT governance and audit aspects of the Post Office scandal. People often ask, how could it go on for so long? Why did nobody realise what was going wrong? Why did nobody speak out? Part of the problem is a willful naivety about the fallibility of complex software systems. Too many people in important positions at the Post Office were clueless about the nature of software. The people who should have educated them didn't do their job. There's no such thing as perfect software unless we're talking about utterly trivial applications. The challenge is, how do we respond so that people do not get hurt? I want to explain that there was a credible structure to prevent exactly this sort of corporate catastrophe. The Post Office had the right processes and had appointed the right sort of people. They should have been able to learn that Horizon was a flawed system. Knowing that, they should have been able to warn the board that they were following a reckless, irresponsible litigation strategy. The internal auditors didn't do their job. I should start by saying that the Post Office did have a credible structure for corporate governance. It was committed to following the widely used 3 lines of defence model. The first line of defence involves operational management applying the agreed controls, risk management and security measures. The second line is provided by specialist risk management, compliance and security functions. The third line is the independent assurance that internal audit offers to the board that the whole model is working effectively. This crucial third line of defence failed at the Post Office. There were clearly other serious failings, but internal audit should have provided the independent assurance that these problems had been detected and managed responsibly. This third line of defence, the final backstop, should have alerted the board if all else had failed. It's worth stressing that internal auditors have a huge amount of power and independence. Internal auditors can demand to see any document or person they want. That's normal. They should have true independence within the corporation. The Post Office Charter for the Board's Audit, Risk and Compliance Committee makes it clear that internal audit reports straight to them and is accountable to them. Executive directors can't sit on the committee, nor can the chair of the board. Only non-executive directors can serve there. And crucially, the UK government, as the owner, had a director who sat on the audit committee, providing a direct line from the corporate governance professionals to the owner. The audit committee's terms of reference require auditors to comply with the professional standards and requirements of the Institute of Internal Auditors. That's significant. They clearly failed to fulfil that responsibility. I've not seen any evidence that they performed an appropriate system audit of Horizon, and there were numerous red flags that should have warned audit that they had to take action. I want to run through some of these red flags. Going right back to 1999, there were clear problems with the project and the system that were visible at the highest political level. The 3 cabinet ministers used words like underestimation, complexity, risk, inaccuracy, difficulty. These are all words that should attract the attention of IT auditors. However, the most startling observation came from Alistair Darling when he said that nobody else was using the same technology. Early adopters of technology often pay a heavy price in problems and poor quality. That's a massive risk factor. This risk was highlighted in an internal technical document 3 years later. Not based on conventional models, not conforming to traditional models, entirely original and highly innovative. These are all euphemisms for very risky. It reads more like a sales pitch than a technical document. I've never seen wording like that in such a document. It would have had us seriously worried in IT audit. 2009, Computer Weekly runs the first story about bankruptcy, prosecutions and disrupted livelihoods being inflicted on sub-postmasters. Internal Post Office memos revealed objections to providing defendants with data about bugs because the outsourcing contract required them to pay Fujitsu extra for that information. I find that amazing as an ex-auditor that we might have had to pay to find out about problems. Accountancy Age reported on the mounting concerns that Horizon had flaws which misstated branch accounts. A senior representative of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales asked the Post Office whether it would perform an IT audit of Horizon. He said, "You need to make sure that your accounting system's bulletproof." He added, "Whether they have an IT audit or not, they need to understand what's happening." It's reported that the Post Office declined to comment when asked if it would perform an IT audit. Accountancy Age also attached an editorial comment to the story. The Post Office should consider an IT audit to show it is taking the matter seriously. And this is when Private Eye picked up on the story and ran with it relentlessly. 2010, the ISME report. This was an internal Post Office report about how to handle the bad publicity. It's striking because of its total certainty that Horizon is entirely reliable and that the sub-postmasters and journalists are variously dishonest and opportunist. The author says that the two big accountancy firms that the Post Office hired can't be used for an investigation because of the caveats, entirely reasonable and professional, that they would put in their findings in any court cases. Also, and bizarrely, the author argues that there's no value to a system audit because it would be relevant only at the point that it's written. There might be some limited validity to that comment if a system's perfect. However, as every IT auditor and software tester knows, no large complex system can ever be perfect. There are always problems that have to be addressed, and audits should uncover the significant ones. The stance of the ISME report is astonishingly unprofessional. Why was internal audit not involved? Did they know that they were being kept out of the loop in an area for which they were responsible? The Post Office knew in September 2010 that Horizon had a bug that meant sub-postmasters were told their account was in balance when the central system recorded a discrepancy. This is fundamental. It undermined a crucial aspect of many of the prosecution cases that sub-postmasters knowingly falsified accounts. The lack of control over powerful IDs revealed by E&Y is shocking. This was part of my job with IBM as a security manager. We agreed the required controls at the start of an outsourcing contract, sometimes even before the start of service, and implemented them within the first few months. Even by 2015, Fujitsu had not resolved this. The only record of actions taken by technicians with full update access to live data was when they logged on and off with no record of what they did. After political pressure on the Post Office, they appointed forensic accountants Second Sight to investigate the system. After a year, Second Sight's interim report was released, and it should have been particularly interesting to the IT auditors, and I'll return to that. In 2013, the board and the Post Office's insurers were warned that one of the main Fujitsu prosecution witnesses withheld evidence about bugs and gave misleading evidence. The Post Office solicitors also told the corporation to stop destroying evidence of Horizon bugs. The Horizon prosecution stopped about then. Was that a coincidence? 2015, Second Sight tell the BIS Select Committee that the Post Office is denying them access to files, and they question whether evidence has justified theft charges. Second Sight was then sacked and directed to hand over or destroy all the material they gathered. This was an absolutely massive red flag. Internal Audit should have been monitoring this investigation and leapt in when Second Sight was sacked to ensure evidence was protected. But Second Sight have confirmed to me that Internal Audit never contacted them at any point during the investigation. The second report was issued anyway, and the government was given a copy. This second report was hugely significant. It was possible for Horizon to generate discrepancies that would trigger prosecutions without any further investigation. The report said, for most of the past 5 years, substantial credits have been made to Post Office's profit and loss account as a result of unreconciled balances held by Post Office in its suspense account. It is in our view probable that some of those entries should have been recredited to branches to offset losses previously charged. In 2015, BBC Panorama ran a programme with a former Fujitsu whistleblower who confirmed that Fujitsu changed branch data remotely. This was crucial, and he gave evidence in the Horizon Issues trial. He contradicted the assertions of the Post Office and Fujitsu that this was impossible without sub-postmasters being aware of it. The Common Issues case was of fundamental importance. After losing that, the Post Office was on the back foot in the Horizon Issues case. They could no longer argue that sub-postmasters were responsible for any losses caused by Horizon unless they could prove it was the system's fault. Justice Fraser found in the Horizon Issues case that the system had a propensity, because of errors and bugs, to cause the kind of shortfalls and alleged losses that sub-postmasters had experienced and for which they were prosecuted. He also found that the post office and Fujitsu exercised powers of remote access to branch terminals without the knowledge of sub-postmasters. The post office settled, but too late to prevent the scathing judgment being announced and published, with that eye-catching line about the post office stance being like an assertion that the earth is flat. So what sort of outfit was Post Office Internal Audit? These figures came from the head of Internal Audit when the Post Office was separated from Royal Mail. It strikes me as being a shockingly small team for a corporation the size of the Post Office. It was intended to cover all of the business, not just IT. I'd have expected there to be 20 to 30 people at a bare minimum if there was to be effective coverage of high-risk areas. My personal opinion is that relying on external auditors to perform internal audits raises concerns about conflicts of interest and also about their knowledge of the systems and business. You need a core of in-house experts. So what system audits were performed? In 2021, Paula Reynolds defended the Post Office's management and auditing of Horizon to the BEIS Select Committee, telling them that the external auditors, Ernst & Young, E&Y, had performed a gold standard SAS 70 system audit. But there are two problems with that. SAS 70 was obsolete by the time she said it was performed, but more significantly, it was not a system-level audit. It applied to the organizational management controls of the IT installation. It didn't cover system-level detail. You need assurance at both levels. If you audit only one level, you do not know what's going on. This is very significant. Reynolds clearly took advice about this since she is using audit jargon 10 years after the event. It shows that the Post Office considered this type of audit relevant to their needs, but they should have been applying the equivalent system-level audit model from the SOC suite of audit reports. The SOC suite of audit reports comes from the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. SOC 1 is the direct replacement for SAS 70. It's widely recognized and the main way of complying with the international auditing standards which are directed at the management controls that affect the financial data produced by an IT installation. SOC 1 reports come in two types. Type 1 offers an opinion on the controls in place at a point in time. Type 2 assesses whether the controls have been effective over a specific period. The relevant model for a system audit in the era of SAS 70 would have been a SysTrust audit, which is meant to provide assurance about particular systems. SysTrust was replaced at the same time as SAS 70 by SOC 2 and SOC 3 reports, which deal with the audit of individual systems. The two reports cover the same ground, but SOC 3 conveys the important information that matters most to outsiders unfamiliar with the systems, whereas SOC 2 is the important one. It examines the detail that matters to system experts and is the sort of audit report that should have been performed on Horizon. As with SOC 1, SOC 2 has two types of audit. Type 1 assesses whether appropriate controls have been designed, and Type 2 assesses whether they're working effectively in the built systems. Both SOC 2 and SOC 3 audits are organised around the 5 categories of the Trust Services criteria: security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Each of these has a number of criteria that well-controlled systems must meet. The criteria may have been formally defined little more than a decade ago, but they're not idealised theoretical standards imposed on practitioners. They're essentially a codified form of long-established good practice and are strikingly similar to the way IT auditors were working long before 2011. Processing integrity is the category that really interests me. According to the AICPA, processing integrity refers to completeness, validity, accuracy, timeliness, and authorization of system processing. That's so important to a system auditor. The AICPA says that processing integrity must address whether systems achieve the aim or purpose for which they exist and whether they perform their intended functions in an unimpaired manner, free from error, delay, omission, and unauthorized or inadvertent manipulation. Bear in mind that the contract that was imposed on the sub-postmasters was heavily loaded against them and meant that the Post Office had little incentive to spend time and money investigating Horizon problems. They could simply blame the sub-postmasters and make them pay. The second site reports from 2013 and 2015 were effectively audit reports, yet there was no sign of the Post Office acting on them. The terminology in the reports is strikingly reminiscent of the criteria for processing integrity, and I'll show you a few examples. There are the criteria, some of the criteria for processing integrity: timely, accurate, complete. And note that phrase there, operating as designed. I'll return to that. The system design caused sub-postmasters to make mistakes for which they were held liable. There we are again, timely, accurate, and complete. And operated as designed again. The design made users make mistakes. Again, we see timely, accurate, complete. The concerns about suspense accounts that I mentioned earlier were raised in the second site report in 2015. They strongly suggest that Horizon was failing the processing integrity criteria of timeliness, accuracy, and completeness. Problems with suspense accounts are a glaring sign of system problems. Suspense accounts exist to trap problems, and they must be investigated closely. In each of these examples, at second site, we're looking at how Horizon worked for the sub-postmasters. That's significant. I said that the AICPA decreed that processing integrity must address whether systems achieve the aim or purpose for which they exist. That raises the question of what the purposes of Horizon were. I've inferred 4 different broad purposes of Horizon. It provided data to the corporate accounts. It allowed the Post Office to manage the accounts of individual branches. It was the means by which the sub-postmasters could manage their branches' finances, and it served as a source of evidence in legal proceedings, whether criminal or civil. But the Post Office only recognised the first 2. A second site reported, although the Horizon system was working as designed, the lack of timely, accurate, and complete information presented to the sub-postmaster was a significant factor in his failing to follow the correct procedures, and that failure resulted in criminal prosecutions. Justice Fraser flipped everything around in the Horizon issues case. The Post Office was focused on the business purposes that suited it. It thought the sub-postmasters' contracts and the legal presumption that computer evidence is dependable meant that they did not need to worry about the 3rd and 4th purposes. The contract meant that Horizon could be safely regarded as entirely reliable. There was no need to waste time and money investigating problems. The sub-postmasters could be forced to pay. Fraser overturned that. He focused on the business purposes that he inferred. He looked at the purposes from the point of view of the sub-postmasters. This is a particularly important point for IT auditors. The judge inferred the purposes that he decided the system should be fulfilling, as IT auditors would. Fraser did not give any real consideration in his judgment to the first 2 purposes. He did not look at the system requirements. These did not get a look in during the trial. Courts will look at the reality that they perceive, at the behaviour of the system and the damage it does. It will not restrict its gaze to what is convenient for system owners. Working as designed is irrelevant if the system does not have processing integrity, if the system does not achieve the aim or purpose for which it exists. So Fraser ruled that Horizon was not reliable. It did not meet its crucial purposes. It did not matter that the Post Office thought that Horizon was doing a good job for the corporation. The ruling in the Horizon issues case must have made Post Office internal audit squirm. It highlighted that the people who were meant to monitor and report on risks had failed to spot a massive risk that would wreck the corporation. The fate of the Post Office was sealed when the judgment was released. The Post Office should have had IT auditors who knew that perfect software is an illusion. They should have stood up to executive management and the board and told them that Horizon was unreliable. IT auditors must be willing to tell senior people news that they really do not want to hear. They need strong technical, analytical, and communication skills. That combination is rare. It's not a job for people who lack confidence, who are timid, or who want to be popular. That's why they're well paid. Good IT auditing is expensive, but as the Post Office has found out, it is not nearly as expensive as bad or non-existent IT auditing. Gerald Weinberg's book, Perfect Software and Other Illusions About Testing, is a classic for software testers, and it was very much in my mind when I was preparing this talk. It should have been compulsory reading at the post office. You might be thinking, okay, so the auditors didn't do their job, but why didn't somebody else speak out? Why wasn't there a whistleblower? That's a good question, and I don't know the answer, but it brings us back to internal audit. According to the Audit Committee's terms of reference, internal audit was responsible for the whistleblowing process, and internal audit had to follow professional standards and the requirements of the Institute of Internal Auditors, and the IIA provides advice that is relevant to this scandal. The IIA sets out criteria for internal auditors to go themselves to the authorities or regulators to report concerns. 4 of these apply to the post office scandal. There was a failure to comply with legal obligations, and there was possible criminal conduct. There were miscarriages of justice, and these would have been obvious to anyone who chose to look. There were acts that harmed individuals. There were cover-ups. But nobody at the post office blew the whistle. Internal audit should have been willing to do so. I believe it was their professional responsibility. A major lesson from previous corporate disasters was that the effectiveness of corporate governance must itself be subject to effective auditing. There's no sign that such auditing was present at the post office, and responsibility for that lies at the very highest levels. If you want to follow up my arguments about the post office scandal, I've written 2 long articles for the Digital Evidence and Electronic Signature Law Review. They're available free online. I hope you found this interesting. Thank you for listening.